So my disclaimer this morning is that much of what I'm going to share with you today is from a wonderful book by Brian McLaren called We Make the Road by Walking. And rather than just keep referring to Brian McLaren said or Brian McLaren wrote, there's my disclaimer. Much of this is from Brian McLaren. A mother was reading a Bible story to her daughter at bedtime. It was the story of Elijah flying to heaven on a chariot of fire. As they finished the story, the daughter asked, "Is that story real or pretend?" Good question. Now, the mother could have answered her daughter, sometimes pretend stories tell more truth and do more good than real ones, like Jesus' parables. Or she might have said, real stories are often added to with pretend parts. But instead, this wise mother said, that's a great question. Some stories are real, some are pretend, and some of the best stories use both reality and make-believe to tell us something important. What do you think about the Elijah story? This wise mother didn't tell her daughter what to think. She invited her to think as a member of the interpretive community. Likewise, when we engage with the stories of the Bible, we become members of the interpretive community. That's a big responsibility, especially when we remember how Bible stories have been used to promote both great good and great harm. As Brian McLaren says, good interpretation begins with 3 elements: science, art, and heart. First, we need critical or scientific research into history, language, anthropology, and sociology to wisely interpret the Bible. Second, since the Bible is a literary and therefore an artistic collection, we need an artist's eye and ear to wisely draw meaning from ancient stories. But at every step, we also must be guided by a humble, teachable heart that listens for the voice of the Spirit. Now, archetypally, a blaze of glory surrounds this hero's departure, symbolized, for example, by the fiery chariot and horses in today's text from 2 Kings. And after the leader is gone, his or her actual life and message are forgotten, obscured by that blaze of fame and glory. People become fans of the leader's reputation, but not followers of his or her example. As Elijah explains to his young apprentice Elisha, the fireworks aren't the point. They're a distraction, a temptation to be overcome. And we see something similar in the story of Jesus' departure as told by Luke in the Acts of the Apostles. Will Jesus' followers look up at the sky and speculate about their departed leader with their heads in the clouds? Will they be fans instead of followers? Or will they get to work staying focused on living and sharing Jesus' down-to-earth way of life, empowered by the Spirit? It's easy to miss the point of these ancient stories. Unlike modern textbooks, these stories don't simply aim to pass on factual information. Rather, they seek people's formation by engaging their interpretive imagination. If we're going to interpret Bible stories with science, art, and heart, we need to place each story within its intended historical context, as well as get a sense for the larger narrative within which the story is situated. For example, the story of Elijah and Elisha is located after the conquest of the Canaanites around 1300 BC. when the Israelites formed a loose confederacy under a series of leaders who were somewhat misleadingly called judges. The term probably better used would be tribal leaders or even warlords. After all, those were violent times, and some of the stories are from those times appalling. From the violent behavior of men to the low status and treatment of women. For example, the book of Judges ends with the brutal acts toward a young woman, followed by intertribal retaliation. Yet in the next story, the book of Ruth, it's the exact opposite. Two kind, courageous women, Ruth and Naomi, forge a life of dignity and beauty in spite of the brutality. Where the men failed, the women prevailed. Pressed on all sides by aggressive nations around them, the 12 tribes united under King Saul, who unfortunately turned out to be a disappointment. But in his shadow, a more heroic figure named David appeared. And while King David was indeed heroic, he was far from perfect. And the scriptures don't cover up his serious failings. Solomon, David's son, wasn't a warrior, so he was allowed to fulfill his father's dream of building a temple. But Solomon used slave labor to build that temple. A tragic irony in light of God's identity as the liberator of slaves. The kingdom split again after Solomon's death, with the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. And almost all the kings of both nations were corrupt, ineffective, and faithful only to their own agendas of gaining and maintaining power at any cost. Politics really don't change, do they? Those darker times made the memory of David's reign seem that much brighter. A dream was born in many hearts, that a descendant of David would one day arise and come to the throne, inaugurating a new kingdom, a new golden age, a new day. The old dream of a promised land was replaced by a new dream for a promised time, a time when the peace, unity, freedom, and prosperity of David's reign would return. This expectation kept hope alive in difficult times, but it also created a sense of pious complacency. And this is what Jesus encounters centuries later. Many are still waiting for a son of David, a militant Messiah, to swoop in one day, fix everything, and usher in Golden Age 2.0. But Jesus is living into a different interpretation of the ancient stories. So he refuses to conform to their expectations. Instead of arming his followers with weapons, he arms them with faith, hope, service, forgiveness, love. When he heals them, he doesn't tell them, I will save you, or my faith will save you. No, he tells them, your faith has saved you. Working from a fresh interpretation of the past, he frees them from both passive pious complacency and desperate violent action, empowering them for faithful, peaceful action. I think this is the kind of empowerment we need to face the huge challenges we have today. How will we deal with political and economic systems that are destroying the planet, privileging super elite, and churning out weapons of unprecedented destruction at an unprecedented rate? How will we deal with religious systems that often have violent extremists on one end and complacent hypocrites on the other? How will we grapple with complex forces that break down family and community cohesion and leave vulnerable people at great risk? How will we face our personal demons? Greed, lust, anxiety, depression, anger, addiction, whatever they may be, especially when people are spending billions to stimulate those demons so we'll buy their products. To find real-world solutions, we need to be wise interpreters of our past. Like Elijah's apprentice, Elisha, we must stay focused on the substance at the center, undistracted by all the surrounding fireworks. Because the meaning we shape from the stories we interpret will, in turn, shape us. Thanks be to God.